Sir, I have to be honest with you. This pistol is not safe to fire. Kyle Merritt said it with the careful tone of a man delivering a verdict he knows the customer will not like. He was standing behind the service counter of Doss and Sons Firearms in Valdosta, Georgia, on a Tuesday morning in October, with an 81-year-old man's Colt 1911A1 field stripped in front of him on a padded mat. The pistol's components were laid out in a line: barrel, recoil spring assembly, slide, frame. And Kyle had spent the last 4 minutes examining each one with the practiced attention of a certified armorer who had seen 1,000 old service pistols come through the counter. This one, he had concluded, was not safe. The recoil spring was compressed to approximately 60% of its manufactured tolerance. A spring that should push with 18 pounds of force was, by his estimate, pushing with 11. The barrel bushing had maybe 0.03 of an inch more play than he preferred. The thumb safety showed wear on the detent face. The trigger group was clean and correctly timed, but the mainspring was original, which meant it was 80 years old, which meant it was past its service life, Kyle said, completing his thought out loud. Any of these components individually, I'd say shoot it carefully and get it looked at. All three together, I'd say don't shoot it until we replace the spring pack at minimum. Could have a failure to return to battery, could have a light strike, could have a safety engagement issue at the wrong moment. He looked up. I can have the parts in by Thursday. The old man in the tan windbreaker looked at the disassembled pistol on the mat for a moment. Then he looked at Kyle. He reached out and began reassembling the pistol. Not quickly, with the same deliberate economy he brought to everything. Barrel into slide. Bushing turned and locked. Slide onto frame. Recoil spring assembly seated. He did it in the time it takes to take 4 slow breaths, without looking at his hands. With the flat certainty of someone who has assembled that particular pistol in conditions where looking at his hands was not an option. He picked it up, press-checked it, seated the magazine, and looked at the door that led to the range behind the shop. Is the range open? He said. Kyle stared at him. Sir, I just told you. I heard you, Ray said. Is the range open? What Kyle Merritt did not know, could not have known, because nothing in the shop's intake form asked for it, and the old man had volunteered nothing, was that the pistol he had just declared unsafe had been carried by Raymond Doss through 14 months of combat operations in Quảng Ngãi Province, Vietnam, in 1967 and 1968, that it had been fired under conditions that made a slightly weak recoil spring and a worn bushing entirely irrelevant considerations, that it had functioned without a single malfunction across that entire period, partly because of the quality of the original manufacture, and partly because the man who carried it had stripped, cleaned, and inspected every component of it every morning for 14 months, regardless of what the previous day had produced. He had been doing so ever since. Every morning, for 56 years, the same inspection, the same clean cloth, the same light oil, the same sequence. He knew this pistol the way a surgeon knows a tool that has been in his hand for half a century. He knew exactly what Kyle had found. He also knew exactly why none of it mattered. If you believe that real knowledge of a thing is earned through using it, not inspecting it, type Fieldcraft in the comments right now. Because what Raymond Doss did on that range on a Tuesday morning in October, and what his son said quietly to Kyle afterward, is a story about the difference between reading a specification and knowing a weapon. His full name was Raymond Luther Doss. He had been born in Lowndes County, Georgia, in the spring of 1944. The second son of a turpentine worker and a woman who had grown up on the Georgia coastal plain and believed in two things absolutely: the Lord's provision and the value of knowing how to do things yourself. His father had owned one firearm, a blued steel .38 revolver he kept in the nightstand, and had taught Ray to shoot it behind the house at tin cans on a fence post when the boy was 9. Not as sport, as education. Ray had enlisted in the Army at 18, completed basic training at Fort Benning, and been assessed for Warrant Officer Candidate School based on test scores that placed him in the 97th percentile for mechanical aptitude and spatial reasoning. He had graduated WOC school in 1964, been commissioned as a Warrant Officer 1, and had spent 3 years in aviation maintenance roles before volunteering in 1967 for a direct action advisory role attached to South Vietnamese forces in First Corps. He had been issued the 1911 A1 upon arrival at his advisory unit in the fall of 1967. It was not a new pistol. It had been manufactured in 1944, the same year Ray was born, and had been through at least 2 previous owners before the Army logistics system brought it to him. He had inspected it, found it mechanically sound, fired 200 rounds through it on his first day at the advisory compound's range, and made 2 decisions. First, that the pistol was excellent, and he trusted it. And second, that he would never let it leave his hand or his holster without knowing its precise mechanical condition. He had carried it through 14 months of operations in terrain that was, by any honest accounting, among the most demanding that American military forces encountered in Vietnam. The advisory role meant small teams, limited support, and the particular kind of close-quarters uncertainty that made a sidearm not a backup weapon, but frequently the primary one. He had fired the pistol in anger on 7 occasions across those 14 months. It had functioned on all 7. He had been awarded the Silver Star for an action in February of 1968, in a river bend outside a village whose name he still remembered, where his team's primary weapons had been lost to water damage, and he had conducted what the citation described as an aggressive and decisive defensive action, using the 1911 as his primary weapon for 11 continuous minutes. The citation used the phrase, "extraordinary valor." Ray had told his son, when Danny was old enough to read it, that the correct phrase would have been appropriate response given the circumstances. He had come home in late 1968. He had kept the pistol. The Army had allowed him to purchase it for the standard price of firearms deemed unserviceable for reissue, which at the time was $17. He had driven it to his parents' house in Valdosta, put it in the same nightstand position his father had used for the .38, and had inspected and cleaned it every morning since. He had retired from a second Army career in aviation logistics in 1988. He had buried his wife, Margaret, in 2017. He drove to his son's gun shop on the second Tuesday of every month to buy ammunition, check in, chucked and used the back range to put 50 rounds through the 1911, a practice he had maintained since Danny had opened the shop in 1987, and that he had maintained in various forms since 1969. He had brought the pistol to the service counter on this particular Tuesday because the thumb safety had felt marginally less crisp than usual on his previous session, and he wanted a second opinion on the detent. He had not intended to create an incident. He had, in his experience, never intended to create incidents. They had a way of finding him regardless. The range behind Doss and Sons was 3 lanes, covered, with a corrugated steel roof that amplified the sound of shots in a way that Danny had never fixed, despite 20 years of meaning to. Steel plate targets hung at 7, 15, and 25 yards. A hand-painted sign on the back wall read, "Customers only, eyes and ears required." Ray had taken lane 2, his usual, and had set up at the bench with the unhurried precision of a man who has performed the same ritual many hundreds of times. Hearing protection in, safety glasses on, magazine inspection. 1 round chambered, press check, decock. He did not do a practice draw. He had not done a practice draw in 50 years. He simply raised the pistol, acquired the 25-yard plate, and waited for his natural point of aim to settle. Kyle had followed him out, not to watch, to stop him. He was standing at the range entrance with his arms crossed and an expression that was trying to balance professional responsibility with the social awkwardness of telling an 81-year-old man not to shoot his own gun. "Sir, I really need to ask you to—" The pistol fired. The 25-yard plate rang. Kyle stopped talking. Ray lowered the pistol slightly, waited a beat, raised it again. The pistol fired again. The plate rang again. He fired all 5 rounds in the magazine in the time it took Kyle to walk from the entrance to lane 2. 5 shots, 25 yards. The pace of a man who is not rushing because he does not need to rush. When the slide locked back on the empty magazine, Kyle was standing 2 feet to Ray's right, and the 25-yard plate was still swinging gently on its chain. Kyle looked at the plate. He looked at the pistol. He looked at the old man. He said very quietly, "You hit it 5 times. "Center," Ray said. He released the slide, removed the empty magazine, and set the pistol down on the bench with the muzzle pointed downrange. The recoil spring feels the same as it always has. The detent on the thumb safety is the issue. I'd like your opinion on whether the detent ball needs replacing or whether the spring behind it is worn." Kyle looked at the pistol on the bench. He looked at the 25-yard plate. He looked at the pistol again. He said, "How long have you had this gun?" Ray removed his hearing protection. "Since 1967, he said. Kyle did the arithmetic. "That's 57 years, he said. "56, Ray said. "I picked it up in the fall." Subscribe to Iron and Honor right now and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Because when Danny Doss comes out of the shop and finds Kyle standing in the range with his mouth open and his arms at his sides, what he tells his armorer about the man who just put 5 rounds in the center of a 25-yard plate with a pistol that failed its safety inspection is the part of this story that Kayla caught on her phone and that nobody on that range ever forgot. Danny had heard the shots from inside the shop. He had heard the rhythm of them. 5 rounds, measured pace, the particular cadence of someone who knows exactly what they're doing. And he had smiled at the cash register before walking out. He found Kyle in lane 2, looking at the 25-yard plate, and his father sitting on the range bench reseating his hearing protection for the next string. "Kyle," Danny said. Kyle turned. "Your armorer's assessment of the pistol," Danny said. "Walk me through it." Kyle walked him through it. The recoil spring, the bushing play, the mainspring age, the thumb safety detent. He made the same case he had made at the counter, competently and correctly, because nothing he had said was wrong. Danny listened to all of it. Then he looked at the 25-yard plate. "What did he just shoot?" Danny said. 5 rounds, Kyle said. "All center, 25 yards. Danny nodded. He was quiet for a moment. "That pistol," Danny said, "was manufactured in 1944. My dad carried it through 14 months of combat in Vietnam. He has fired it every month for 56 years. He has cleaned it every morning for 56 years. He paused. He knows every thousandth of an inch of tolerance in that gun. He knows the feel of the recoil spring at full compression and at half compression. He knows what the thumb safety detent feels like at 90% and at 70%. He looked at Kyle. When he brought it in today and said the detent felt off, he was right. That's what needs attention. The recoil spring and the bushing and the mainspring are exactly where he knows they are, and they will function exactly as he expects them to, because he has shot that pistol enough times to know what it will and won't do. Kyle was quiet. The specification says replace those components, Kyle said carefully. The specification is written for armorers who don't know the pistol, Danny said. He is the specification. He looked at his father, who had finished his prep and was raising the pistol for a second string. He came in for the detent, Danny said. Fix the detent. Leave the rest alone unless he asks you to change it. He walked back inside. Kyle stood in the range and watched Ray put 5 more rounds through the 25-yard plate. Same rhythm, same pace, same center hits. He thought about the recoil spring at 60% of its manufactured tolerance. He thought about the barrel bushing with 0.003 of an inch of additional play. He thought about the original mainspring, 80 years old, that had been inspected every morning for 56 years by the man currently shooting tight groups at 25 yards with it. He thought about the specification. He thought about what Danny had said. He is the specification. Ray shot 3 strings of 5 that morning, his standard Tuesday session, and came back inside to find Kyle at the service counter with the pistol's thumb safety removed and a small tray of components in front of him. Detent ball is fine, Kyle said. The spring behind it has lost tension. It's a standard part. I have it in stock. Takes about 10 minutes. Ray sat down on the stool Danny kept on the customer side of the counter for exactly this purpose. He had been sitting on that stool for 30 years. How much? He said. No charge, Kyle said. He was already at the parts bin. My call. He paused without turning around. Can I ask you something? Go ahead. In 56 years, Kyle said, has it ever malfunctioned? Ray thought about this for a moment with the seriousness the question deserved. Twice, he said. See, both failures to feed, both in 1968. Both traced to a bad batch of ammunition, not the pistol. He watched Kyle work. I pulled around from the batch, inspected the primer seating, confirmed the crimp was inconsistent, switched to a different lot. Never happened again? Kyle worked quietly for a moment. You diagnosed a feeding malfunction to an ammunition lot inconsistency, Kyle said slowly. In Vietnam? In 1968. In the field, Ray said. Yes. Kyle turned the safety over in his hand, reassembled the detent with the new spring, tested the action 3 times with deliberate clicks. He seated the component back in the frame, function tested the safety through its full range of movement. He handed the pistol across the counter. Ray took it. He worked the safety once. On, off, on. He nodded. That's right, he said. How does it feel compared to what you brought it in for? Kyle said. Identical to how it felt in 2019 before it started going off, Ray said, which is where it should be. Kyle wrote up the service ticket. Thumb safety detent spring replaced. No charge. He stood with the ticket for a moment. I owe you an apology, he said. Ray looked at him. For the unsafe to fire assessment, Kyle said. That was a specification reading. It wasn't an assessment of the pistol. Ray was quiet for a moment. You were doing your job, he said. You looked at the components and you told me what the spec said. That's correct armorer practice. But I was wrong, Kyle said. You were incomplete, Ray said. There was no edge in it, just precision, the same precision he applied to everything. The specification is written for the general case. This isn't the general case. This pistol has been in one person's hands for 56 years. The person knows it better than the specification does. He pocketed the spare magazine. That's not a criticism of the specification. The specification is correct for guns it doesn't know. I know this gun. He stood up from the stool. The detent spring, he said. Good call. That was the issue. He picked up the pistol, holstered it in the plain brown leather holster, and said goodbye to Kayla at the front desk. He drove home in the black Lincoln Town car, made his lunch, and sat at the kitchen table in the same chair where he had eaten every meal since Margaret died. On the wall across from the table hung a photograph. Not a military photograph, a family one, taken at Danny's shop opening in 1987. Ray was 43 in it, now standing in the shop doorway with his arm around Margaret and his other hand on Danny's shoulder. He was wearing civilian clothes. You could not tell anything about him from the photograph. That was how he preferred it. Kayla had not intended to post the video. She had been filming the range session on her phone to show Danny. She had thought he would want to know what had happened before he came out. And afterward, she had not deleted it. And then a week later, she had posted it to the shop's social media page with the caption, "He brought it in because the safety felt off. The armorer said, 'Don't fire it.' He put 5 rounds in the center at 25 yards. He's had the gun for 57 years. The caption was wrong about the years. It was 56, as Ray had specified. But the video was correct about everything else. The 5 shots at the measured pace. The 25-yard plate ringing 5 times. The old man in the tan windbreaker setting the pistol down on the bench with the muzzle downrange. The video reached 400,000 views in 11 days. Danny told his father about it on the following Tuesday, when Ray came in for his session. Ray looked at Danny for a moment. "It's 56 years, he said, not 57. He went out to the range. There are men in this country in their 80s who have been doing one thing with one instrument every morning for more than half a century. They are not experts in the modern sense. They are not certified, not credentialed, not current on the specification revision. They are something older and more specific. They are the people who know one thing completely, succinct in the way that only repetition across decades of real conditions can produce. Kyle Merritt is a good armorer. His assessment was technically accurate. The recoil spring was below specification. The bushing had excess play. The mainspring was past its recommended service interval. None of that was wrong. What was incomplete was the assumption behind it. The assumption that a specification tells you everything a weapon can do. It tells you what it was designed to do. It tells you what it should do in the hands of any competent user under standard conditions. It does not tell you what it will do in the hands of the one man who has carried it, cleaned it, fired it, and trusted his life to it across 56 years and 14 months of combat and a river bend in Quảng Ngãi Province and 7 Tuesday mornings a year since 1969. And that is not in the specification. That is in the man. Subscribe to Iron and Honor for the men who know the thing in their hands better than any document written about it. Hit the bell. Don't miss the next one. The armorer read the spec. The vet knew the gun. 5 rounds, center, 25 yards. The pistol agreed with the vet.